It was an ordinary afternoon in Castel Gandolfo when a point of light pierced the silence of the papal walls. The sun was softly setting over the horizon, tinting the ancient stones with gold, when Pope Leo XIV decided without prior warning or protocol to abandon the path carved by centuries and follow an inner trail toward a place where not even the spotlights dared to reach. This route led to the heart of a cloistered, Poor Clares monastery where the rhythm of enclosure was broken only by silent vows and deep prayers. There, he entered, covered by a simple paneo, without Swiss guard phalanxes, without visible escort, just a man kneeling before God and those who listen. Stepping onto the cold stone corridor, each footstep seemed to weigh with the decades of prayer that inhabited it. There were no applauses, no cameras, no interviews or photographers waiting for the moment. There was only silence, silence that whispers, heals, and converts. The chains of institutional tradition did not follow this gesture. Leo XIV opened the door without warning, with a humble and direct look, and upon crossing the threshold, the inner bells rang softly, as if recognizing the shepherd returning to his hidden flock. It was at that moment the world began to wonder, what is happening in Castel Gandolfo on the morning when the Vatican corridors were filled with the shock of unusual silence? Pope Leo XIV's personal secretaries noticed something out of the ordinary. The chambers were empty. No notice, no agenda, no driver. The Pope had disappeared. Within minutes, speculations began to quietly echo through the golden halls of St. Demosis. Where was the Vicar of Christ? But what few knew, would only discover days later, was that this disappearance was not an act of fleeing, it was an act of seeking. A deliberate, bold, radical, almost scandalous gesture in its simplicity. Pope Leo XIV left alone, aboard a common car, with a folded white habit on the seat beside him and a rosary between his fingers. He left behind the palace of Castel Gandolfo. For centuries had been a refuge of papal rest and luxury, and headed toward the unexpected. A hidden monastery on the hills where cloistered Poor Clares live, who do not speak to the world, but speak to God. There, far from media surveillance and curial formality, he chose obscurity to announce a higher light. Upon entering that place, the Pope was not received as a head of state. He was welcomed as a brother. He sat on the stone floor, hands open on his knees, and spent hours in silence, praying alongside those forgotten women who nonetheless carry the invisible weight of the universal church on their backs. This was Leo XIV's escape, a secret liturgy and unamplified Eucharist, a revolution without words, and that precisely that was what shocked the world, because never before had a pope so openly rejected the comfort of power to hide in the mystery of listening. Never before had a successor of Peter decided to disappear in order to appear where least expected, in the heart of those who pray in silence, in the cloister of those who consume themselves for the salvation of the world. While journalists sought answers and diplomats awaited statements, Leo XIV was on his knees, not to perform spiritual theater, but because he understood as few do that the future of the church will not be built with speeches, but with shed tears, inhabited silence, and love that needs no explanation. And it was there, in that cold room, surrounded by sisters without public faces, that he spoke one of his most striking phrases. I did not come to ask for prayer. I came to ask for forgiveness, because for too long we have forgotten where the strength of the church comes from. This phrase was not officially released, it was whispered by one of the Poor Clares in a handwritten letter sent to a nearby bishop, and like all that is truly holy, spread like invisible fire through sensitive souls. In this gesture, both human and mystical, the Pope redefined what it means to lead the church in the 21st century, not with the scepter, but with listening, not with imposed dogmas, but with gestures that bleed truth, not with public announcements, but with silent presences that scream eternity. There is a place in the world where time seems to have stopped, where no sirens are heard, no political debates echo, no Vatican scandals are discussed, a place without screens, without headlines, without titles, a place where the only constant noise is the beating of hearts in prayer. This place exists, and in it live the Poor Clares women who have chosen to dedicate their very existence to something the modern world no longer knows how to name, the living presence of God. They do not give interviews, they do not publish books, they have no social media, their names are unknown, their faces unseen, their deeds unmeasured. But it is these women hidden beneath veils, behind walls and iron gates, who bear the secret weight of the church with their bodies, their blood, and their souls. They are the beating heart of a mystical body that bleeds in silence, and it was precisely there that Pope Leo XIV went, not to give speeches, not to command, but to learn. For 2 entire days, Leo XIV lived like one of the poor. He rejected any special accommodation, slept in a simple cell on a straw mattress with a wooden crucifix, washed his own dishes, joined in moments of adoration and deep silence, and above all, he listened. What he heard, no one knows for sure, but there is something all the Poor Clares witnessed. The Pope wept, not a political tear, not a calculated gesture, but a deep, long, dense weeping, as if the weight of all Christendom had exploded inside him. He said nothing. He only knelt before the cross in the inner chapel and wept as one who can no longer bear the absence of the sacred. It was there that the Poor Clares realized that this man dressed in white, yet stripped of all titles, had not come to visit. He had come to dwell. He had come to confess with his body what perhaps no encyclical could express in words, that the church was sick, but that there was still hope, and that hope was hidden precisely where no one looked. One of the sisters later wrote, "He wept, but it was not despair. It was as if he saw something we do not see. He wept like one who senses a birth, the weeping of one who still believes." These words were secretly delivered to the Cardinal of Marseille, but like all spiritual truths, they found a way to echo beyond the walls. The most striking moment, however, came at the end of the visit, when the Poor Clares, following tradition, asked the Pope if he wished them to pray for any specific intention. He replied, "Pray that I disappear ... so that only Christ remains." This phrase shocked not only the sisters, it later became a kind of secret prayer repeated by bishops, monks, theologians and lay people all over the world. "May I disappear, so that only Christ remains." It summarizes the spiritual reform Leo XIV began, not with decrees but with tears, not with force but with absence, not with laws but with a living presence in invisible places. And that was what made the world tremble, because by fleeing Castel Gandolfo and taking refuge in a hidden monastery, the Pope not only rejected the symbols of power, he reconfigured the very center of gravity of the Church. He revealed that perhaps the strength of future Catholicism is not in synodal documents, nor in diplomatic treaties, nor in doctrinal reforms. Perhaps it isn't always was in the womb of the silent, contemplative, hidden Church, where God still speaks because he is still heard. This secret journey was not a scandal for the faithful, it was a scandal for the complacent. The world used to popes who give speeches. Bless and Appear now faced a pope who hid, who wept, who washed dishes with the Poor Clares, and prayed like a beggar before the Blessed Sacrament. A pope who did not want to be the answer, but the question. A pope who does not seek followers, but conversions. And perhaps that is why this escape was the greatest prophetic gesture of the century. Not because it broke protocol, but because it opened a mystical fissure in the heart of the world. A crack through which the light of eternity began to pass again. What happens when the Pope leaves through the back door and chooses the shadow of a monastery instead of the spotlight? What happens when the successor of Peter rejects the comfort of Castel Gandolfo and opts for a straw bed beside cloistered women? What happens when the visible head of the Church decides to disappear? Panic ensues, but not among the faithful. Panic begins inside the palaces. The news of Pope Leo XIV's escape was received at the Vatican like thunder on a cloudless day. The announcement came through no official channels. No public statements, no press releases, no conferences, only silence. And silence, in this case, was the loudest shout of all. The corridors of the Roman Curia froze. Diplomatic routines were interrupted. The Swiss Guard was disoriented. Secretaries, archbishops, and cardinals began exchanging messages in an almost conspiratorial tone. He fled. Was he threatened? Is he ill? Is he on a spiritual retreat? No one knew for sure, only that he was no longer where he should be. But this unrest was not only logistical, it was theological. Because by leaving the castle, Leo XIV left behind more than stone walls and privileged views. He abandoned the symbolic place of control. Castel Gandolfo, over the centuries, was not only a papal summer retreat, it was the living representation of the Church's spiritual monarchy. It was the place where popes rested, but also where they isolated themselves from the noise of the world and decided the fate of dioceses, treaties, bishoprics, and nations. When Leo XIV turned his back on all this, he did not just descend the mountain, he silently tore down a spiritual security architecture that many still believed divine. But he did not fall, he went deeper. He descended into another kind of territory, that of pure listening, of prayer without an audience, of life without glory, and this gesture had immediate and invisible consequences. Inside the Vatican, some said the Pope was in crisis. Others said he had been influenced by radical monastic forces. Some feared a new silent schism that would begin not with words, but with gestures. But the most attentive noticed something else. The Spirit was moving. And that just is dangerous, because when the Spirit truly moves, it respects no protocols. It blows where it wills, it destabilizes structures, it topples, towers, it touches the small, it humbles the great, it reveals the forgotten, it breaks the mirror where many gaze, and shows a face many no longer want to see, the crucified face of a Christ who demands not thrones, but broken hearts. This is exactly what happened to some members of the high hierarchy. Less than 48 hours after the escape, two bishops in Lisbon and another in Poland announced extended spiritual retreats. 3 cardinals cancelled diplomatic commitments. One of them, in a private letter revealed later, wrote, "If the Pope can disappear, perhaps it is time for us to also die to the world." That was the real impact, not the escape of a man, but the collapse of an idea. The idea that the Church needs visibility, institutional power, narrative control. Leo XIV, with a single action, destabilized decades, perhaps centuries of administrative mentality, and by doing so, he touched what is most intimate in the faithful people, the desire for authenticity. While some shouted scandal, others began to pray like never before. Prayer groups multiplied in Mexico, the Philippines, Nigeria, and rural France. What seemed a private gesture turned into a collective shock, because silence is contagious. Social media, accustomed to short, explosive phrases, didn't know how to translate this event. The Pope disappeared. The Pope is praying. The Pope fled luxury, but no caption captured what was truly happening. A spiritual earthquake was underway, invisible to the eyes of the world, but felt in the soul of those who can still kneel. This earthquake did not start with a denunciation, nor a miracle, nor an apparition. It began with a choice. The choice to pray hidden with women no one sees. The choice to disappear for a time to remind the world who should truly appear. The choice to give God back the Church's PROTAGONISM. And that choice, for many, was the greatest heresy. And, for others, the last hope. That is why a German theologian said, in an almost ignored interview, what Leo XIV is doing is teaching the world that the Church is not a system. It is a sigh that, perhaps, is about to become a shout that will not come from megaphones or cathedrals, but from the silent womb of a faith that has survived empires, heresies, reforms, and abuses, and now breathes again. While the palaces trembled, while cardinals whispered behind golden walls, while theologians debated the meaning of the papal escape, something much deeper was happening far from Rome, in places where voices are unheard, where bells no longer ring, where tabernacles are covered in dust, where looking to the sky is the only answer against hunger, war, or loneliness. There, something awakened. In a slum on the outskirts of Latin America, a woman on her knees wept silently as she heard on an old battery radio that the Pope had withdrawn to pray with the Poor Clares. She did not know the name of the monastery, did not understand who Mario Grech was, nor the theology behind the gesture, but she understood something theology cannot explain. The shepherd had descended from the throne to kneel with the invisible sheep, and she cried like one who recognizes an answer not rational, but spiritual. In a forgotten village in the Syrian countryside, a refugee boy clutched a wooden crucifix handmade by his father. Upon hearing that the Pope had fled to pray, he asked his mother, "Is he praying for me too?" And that mother, with tears in her eyes, replied, "Yes, my son, he went away, so that you may appear before God." This is the miracle of Leo XIV's gesture. He did not speak, but everyone understood, because there is something in faith that needs no dictionary. When a shepherd bleeds with his sheep, the hearts of the poor tremble even if they do not know why. In the Brazilian interior, in the mountains of Ethiopia, in the forests of the Philippines, in the forgotten suburbs of India, entire communities began to pray, not out of despair, but out of identification. It was not the Pope who had fled. It was God who, once again, took the place of a man and reminded the world that the throne is his, not ours. While the powerful clamored for order, the small ones knew a new spring was beginning, but not a spring of flowers, a spring of tears. A spring made of silence and conversion, a spring of return to the essence. Reports emerged of spontaneous confessions in empty churches, of prolonged adorations by young people who had never knelt before, of monks who broke decades of cloister just to say, "We understand what he is doing." It was not a protest. It was not an escape. It was a plunge. And the first to hear this plunge were not doctors, nor canon lawyers, nor journalists. They were the poor in spirit, the hungry for justice, those who cry in secret because they no longer see God in liturgies but who now see God in a gesture. Pope Leo XIV did not go to war. He did not sign a treaty. He did not proclaim a dogma. But by kneeling on the cold floor of a monastery of absolute silence, he told the world there is still time. Time to repent, to convert, to pray, to start again. And in this new journey, those who will march ahead will not be those with titles, but those who thirst. While the great run after headlines and critics seek political explanations, perhaps you there, in the silence of your room, have felt something too. A shiver, a restlessness. A call that did not come from the video, but from within. Did you hear the whisper? If so, do not ignore it. Write in the comments, "I heard." And if this video spoke to your soul, share it with someone who also needs to relearn how to listen in the dark. Because maybe the miracle is beginning at the very moment most still think nothing is happening. See you soon, in the next chapter of this story that is no longer just about the Pope, but about all of us. Turn on notifications, subscribe, and until the next signal.